The Space Museum is a fascinating piece of Doctor Who history. It's an entirely surviving 4-part serial from Season 2, slap bang in the middle of the Heartland era, that almost nobody likes very much. Yet, many would argue it's one of the most influential Doctor Who stories in Doctor Who history. It also makes for a terrifyingly odd viewing experience, beginning as a classic, and then finishing as, well, something far from a classic. So what was the Space Museum about? Why is its reputation so contradictory? And why has it had such a profound effect on the very fabric of Doctor Who? The first episode of the Space Museum, titled The Space Museum, might be one of the most perfect single episodes of Doctor Who, despite the serial's overall reputation. This episode is fairly ubiquitously enjoyed. That is because it isn't really part of the overall serial, it's more of a 25-minute extended prelude. The episode is a mystery, and more mystery, with very little answers off the bat. It's truly the definition of mystery box storytelling, but it makes for thoroughly entertaining viewing. Our mystery begins on the TARDIS, as the Doctor and his companions, Ian, Barbara and Vicky, leave their adventure in the Crusade, which ended with them wearing 13th century clothing. However, there's some kind of glitch and their clothes turn to their 1960s outfits. This is the first of many unexplained occurrences which take place in this episode. However, it's not long before something else takes place. Vicky goes to get a glass of water from the food machine and she drops the glass, before a tree forms in her hand, reversing up, with the water in it. It's at this point it becomes very clear that something is wrong, and whatever it is, it's something to do with time. When the Doctor and his companions step out of the TARDIS onto an alien planet, they soon notice that despite walking in the sand, they leave no footprints. They enter the nearby building, which turns out to be a space museum, and come across two people. They don't seem to react to their presence at all. It appears as if they either ignored them or just didn't see them. Upon entering the museum, the TARDIS crew come across two more people who talk amongst themselves but make no sound. They wonder if they're speaking in very high frequency that humans can't hear, but coupled with everything else, the reality of the situation is becoming more and more clear to the Doctor. They soon discover they can't actually interact with any of the objects. When they try to touch anything, their hands just go straight through them. It's as if they have no physical presence in this world. Then they discover the TARDIS inside the museum despite it being outside. They try to enter it but unable to interact with it as well, as their bodies just go straight through it. Finally, they discover 4 glass cases with frozen versions of themselves on display in the museum. It's here when finally all the pieces come together. They are in their future, but on another dimension of time, invisible to anything and everything but themselves. And what they are seeing is what will happen to them in the near future. And then finally, time clicks into place. They go back to the normal dimension. The Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Vicky arrive on the planet for real this time, before these events, and for the next 3 episodes, they must prevent their futures. The mystery, while perhaps a little obvious to modern viewers, is incredibly intriguing and wonderfully allowed to develop over the course of a 25-minute episode as a slow burn. The episode is literally just the Doctor and his companions exploring the museum as more and more elements of this mystery are laid up and up and up, until we reach the narrative crescendo of discovering themselves and falling back into the narrative flow of time. It is very well done. So, the Space Museum is a story about time. It's the first Doctor Who story to really be about time itself, which for a show about time travelling is quite surprising, and actually it's one of the very few classic series episodes to do this. So it's quite groundbreaking in that regard, and the first episode really mines every possible story beat out of this. The idea opened Doctor Who up to a new type of story, and one firmly rooted in science, which Sidney Newman had originally pitched right at the beginning of the show's creation and might have got a bit lost over the way. It's the first time the question of, once you know your future, how do you prevent it? And the idea of whether time itself becomes set in stone once witnessed is posed. The story becomes one about whether or not the Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Vicky can avoid their fate or not. There's also the question about whether the characters actively taking action in the stories are leading them down the path to their future or preventing it. The characters do discuss later on in the story perhaps it'd be better if they just sat back and did nothing, because they don't know. So what's so genius here is the eventual way the Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Vicky managed to prevent it. It's so inspiring, especially for a time when no one else was telling stories like this. Everything they do gets them in the same situation, like a bootstrap paradox. But what's different here is their actions have caused other people around them to change and to develop. And because of that, because of their interference in other people, they do different things. And that changes history and prevents their fate. It's really very clever. Their influence on the supporting characters gets them to behave differently and prevent the TARDIS team's future. Nothing the TARDIS team can do will have any effect, but their personal effect on others allows their new character development to save them. It's very timey-wimey, and the Space Museum did this first. It did it in 1965. It changed everything. So then why is the Space Museum not really viewed that favourably overall? Well, it's because of parts 2, 3 and 4. While they do have everything I just spoke about running through them, especially part 4, it's still a very minor part of the plot. After episode 1, which starts off so very well, the thing you'd expect the story to be about, how to avoid the future if you know already, is not the main focus of the story. It's there, absolutely, but mostly it's a fairly bog-standard story where the Doctor helps the rebels and they defeat the evil oppressors. It's something we've seen in Doctor Who time and time again, even by this point in its very early history. The Space Museum's issue is that it has this genius idea that it explores for the first 25 minutes, and briefly dips into throughout, but for the most part it chickens out of fully utilising it in favour of telling the most bog-standard story you could think of. And it's not even a good Doctor helps the rebel story. The Morlocks, our main villains, are idiots and completely unthreatening. I mean, their name is only one letter away from morons, and that's pretty apt. But even worse are our rebels. They're a band of rather silly-looking, blonde schoolboys in black jumpers who for some reason have double eyebrows, and they're utter wimps. All they need to do to actually defeat the Morlocks is open a locked door, and that's it. Yet for years, they just haven't done that because, well, we don't know. I think they just haven't thought of it. Seriously, this revolution happens because Vicky suggests getting rid of the Morlocks. And they go, well, that's quite a nice idea, so they just do it and should compute into opening the door. And then they defeat the Morlocks very easily afterwards. Why did they need Vicky to tell them to have a revolution if the Zerons are being treated as awfully as they claim, and are so unhappy with the Morlocks warning them? Why didn't they just think of doing a revolution before? The whole story is littered with these strange lapses in logic. It's really terrible. So it's a shame, because the possibilities they had with the story at that time were discarded in exchange for some idiots revolting against some other idiots. So even with a whole quarter of the story being practically outstanding, its reputation is in tatters among fans, because the rest is absolute rubbish. However, some have the view that the Space Museum is actually a strange, deep-cut parody of Doctor Who itself, and is intentionally bizarre in this way. So, I'm going to let Rob Shearman explain more from the land of DVD extras.
It's a comedy, but it's done, I think it's directed as if it isn't. And I think that is its biggest failing. People don't realise it's actually funny. It's a parody of what a William Hartnell Doctor Who story at this stage is. We've already seen several stories which are about a Doctor and his crew arriving, finding some rebels, helping them against some aggressors and flying off again. You have these aggressors, and they're rubbish. The only thing which is worse than the Morlocks are the rebels who are trying to fight them, who are so rubbish they can't even be bothered to stop them. The rebels dress in black polo neck sweaters, stand around looking a bit like students in a coffee bar. Ultimately, that certain scenes which I think deliberately parody earlier scenes in the series. So, for example, you've got that wonderful scene in the Daleks, where Ian persuades the Thals to go and attack the Dalek city, selfishly so they can get their TARDIS component back, is echoed again when Vicky makes all the rebels start a revolution, just almost because she's quite bored and wants something to happen. And it's done very, very amusingly. These are rebels so naff that they only think which starts a revolution is if they can get the armoury door open. They don't really need Robespierre. They don't need some great revolutionary. They need a locksmith.
Obviously, when we talk about Doctor Who stories about time itself, one man's name takes prominence. That is, of course, former Doctor Who showrunner, the writer of more episodes than any other person. It's the Moff himself, the most subtle sexual fetishist on the planet, Steven Moffat. So, what the Space Museum does here for the very first time becomes integral to the writing of Steven Moffat 40 years later. Even in his first contribution to Doctor Who, The Curse of Fatal Death, you hear a fair few time-bending ideas that the Space Museum posed in 1965. In his first proper story, The Empty Child, the whole story is about Jack knowing that a German bomb will drop on this Tudor ship. And it's about everything coming back to that point in time, with the solution being a sci-fi one that requires Jack to sacrifice himself. Well, he thinks so initially. The Gun in the Fireplace uses time and events we know from history must happen to drive its story. Blink has the villains literally moving people back in time and feeding off that time, so that one's self-explanatory. The silence of a library is the Doctor meet with a song to unlock this future, and her whole story is so complicated but intrinsically a story about time. We haven't even got to his own era yet, but there are so many. So I'm not even going to go into them, but you get the idea. Think about pretty much any Moffat story, and there's probably something similar to the ideas presented in the Space Museum going on. However, let's take a look at a story from the Moffat era that does this, but wasn't actually written by Moffat. But the reason why is because I think it gets the closest to what the Space Museum was trying to do. I'm talking about Under the Lake and Before the Flood, written by Toby Whithouse. The cliffhanger of Under the Lake sees Clara come face to face with the Doctor's ghost in the present, while the Doctor is in the past. This means she knows, and she tells the Doctor that he knows too, that whatever happens in the past must cause the Doctor to die and become a ghost. The rest of the episode is about that idea, like the Space Museum. Once you know your future, how can you prevent it? Unlike the Space Museum though, Before the Flood implements this story point much better, and it's just a far better written story as a whole. But I want to give some kudos to the Space Museum, because I think its resolution actually works better. Before the Flood has the whole thing be a cheat, with it not really being the Doctor's ghost at all that she saw, and it's just that they thought it was. The Space Museum, on the other hand, has it be about the effect the Doctor has on others, which changes history. However, Before the Flood does have an extra story level about bootstrap paradoxes, so events kind of have to remain exactly the same as it's the rule of time travel, its users don't allow for changes, or whatever. So all in all, I think the Space Museum did, though, practically change everything by introducing this type of story, because it changed the rules of Doctor Who, what made a Doctor Who story, what was allowed as a Doctor Who story. It might have done it badly overall, but the fundamentals were there. It did take a while, of course those rules didn't become commonplace, they were done occasionally, but for a commonplace version of Doctor Who, it took to the 21st century. But it was the Space Museum that got there. It certainly changed the show forever, and for that, perhaps, just perhaps, it should be reappraised.